Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're out here in the shop. I know I haven't shot a video in the shop in a while. Big speaker that I just didn't want to whack over there to the listening room, and it is what it is. The shop's a bit of a disaster right now because we're working on so many projects, but we're knocking stuff out and things are rolling pretty smoothly. We're getting orders out timely now. We have inventory, we have tweeters in stock. All that's good. I hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving. This is my first video I've shot since Thanksgiving. It was a great holiday for me. All the employees left. We needed a break, and I hope you guys had a good break and a good Thanksgiving with family and friends as well. Before I start, also, I want to say, yes, I did get my hair cut. Yep, pretty good little chop here. It's my daughter's wedding coming up next Saturday. My daughter's getting married, and she said, "Daddy, will you get your hair cut like this for my wedding?" And she showed me a picture of me from 3 years ago when I had short hair, and I said, okay, so it's off for my daughter's wedding. And also, I got this cool shirt from Ted Allen. Ted, thanks, man, for sending me a shirt. I love it when you guys send me cool stuff. NHRA t-shirt, one of the coolest prints I've ever seen, one of the coolest shirts anybody's ever sent. Big dragster on the front. Backside has the same dragster, but going the other direction there from behind. So really cool print. And I guess Ted knows I'm big into racing. I love racing. I do drag racing. And if you've ever had an opportunity to watch one of these Top Fuel dragsters launch, go to a NHRA national event. It's worth every penny. It's a lot of fun. First round of eliminations, Top Fuel dragsters blowing by. It's crazy. Wear ear protection, though. Always wear ear protection when you go to the drag strip. I always wear the earplugs and cover my ears when the really loud ones come up. So do that. So thanks, Ted, for the cool shirt. Now, speaker today, a vintage speaker from Snell. And you guys are always asking me about vintage speakers, and sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes it's a basket case from 40 years ago, and you're wanting to know, would this be a good candidate for a high-end speaker if we just did this or that to it? And usually not. There is a lot of times that we do upgrades on vintage speakers for nostalgic reasons. There's sentimental value. You want to restore the speaker. Totally understandable. We help you guys with that when you're asking us to work on a vintage speaker. But as far as performance per dollar, especially when you start swapping out drivers, and really all you're starting with are new drivers and an old box that was not designed for those drivers, and it's not the type of box that we would want to use for those drivers if we were starting from scratch. So most of the time it doesn't work out. But if it's something like the Snell here, where the drivers are all in great shape, the speaker's in great shape, and we just want to see, can we take it up to modern performance levels? Is there something we can do with this? And in this case, absolutely, man. This was a good speaker. Back in the day, this thing was $2,500 a pair. This was back in the early 90s. It is a particle board box. It uses VIFA drivers, but pretty nice drivers. I'm going to pick up a couple of the woofers here. Let me put my specs on so I can see. Woofers, mid-ranges, tweeter, all this made from Peerless, made by Peerless. There were some nice stickers on the back that said manufactured for Snell Acoustics, and it looks like a Peerless made sticker. But if you peel it off, underneath the sticker is a Peerless sticker that gives you the Peerless model number and catalog number for this woofer. So it is a commercially available woofer, privately labeled, but commercially available. And so if you guys need replacement drivers for some of these, there probably are some of them out there. Crossover wise, it's kind of a mixed bag. For the time, these were not that bad. Mostly air core inductors on the mid in the tweeter. There are some poly caps and polystyrene caps and stuff used in the critical pass. There is an iron core inductor. I don't know if you can see it way back here at the back up top. And a big air core inductor, which has a metal bolt running through it, which is kind of crazy. that run to the lower woofers. So, and some electrolytic caps on the lower woofers and things like that. Sandcast resistors. So there's definitely some room for improvement there. And I thought, you know what? Let's see what we can do with these things. Oddly, the lower woofers were wired in series. The upper mids were wired in parallel. And then there's a rear firing tweeter on the back side that was switchable. There are 2 sets of binding posts on the back. It's inexpensive, just brass binding posts. And then, let me see if I can find my magnets here. I have a little handful of magnets to show you because all of the parts internals are all magnetic. They're steel screws. The tabs that fit on the back side of them, everything on these things were steel. It's like, ugh, come on, guys. You could have used some brass parts or something, but ugh. So, lots of room for improvement there. Let's look at the measurements. And when I took the measurements, I also looked up some information of this thing online. It was reviewed by Stereophile. And I always look at JA's, John Atkinson's measurements, and compare them to mine. Sometimes they match exactly. This time they were off. The impedance curves were exactly the same. So I know electrically they were wired the same. As far as acoustic output, they're very different. And that's not because our measuring systems are different. We measure things basically exactly the same. And I know there's times that companies have products reviewed for Stereophile, and they've sent them to me prior to them going to Stereophile for me to measure and test it, make sure that the pair is correct, make sure that they measure well in the way that they want them to before they get sent to Stereophile for review, because they are going to get measured there. And my measurements always match John Atkinson's measurements exactly. So in this case, though, this isn't the exact same speaker. So there could be some variances within the driver's response, but I found it pretty off from his measurements. Also, he always does near-field measurements of lower woofers or ports and splices those in. So he's dropping the output levels way down, getting the microphone up close, taking a measurement, and then bringing that level up to wherever he feels it matches and splices it in, which typically causes a higher output at the very bottom, usually around 100 hertz or so. You can see in his measurements there's always a peak right there, and that's because of the way he's splicing those in, which basically is just giving you an idea of what you could expect if you put that thing into a room, because he's showing you the low frequency extension. We typically never do that. We can, but it doesn't make a lot of sense because it's really not what the speaker is doing at distance. It's an approximation of what could happen. So when you splice that stuff in. So our measurements always look a little different in that regard. But other than that, they're different. Let's look at some of the measurements. The on-axis frequency response, we see the output levels of the woofers are down a little bit in my measurements from the mids. We've got a little bit of a dipped area there around 1800 hertz, followed by a pretty good peaked area there that goes from 2000 to 4000. There's a pretty good little peak. Doing the lower woofers independently and splicing them, or not splicing them, but overlaying them into the curve, you can see they crossed right at 350 in my measurements. JA had them crossing at 300. Within the inconsistencies of the drivers and the way we're measuring and how far the microphone is and things like that, but that's normal. Looking at the horizontal off-axis, we can see it's a little rough through the 2 to 3 kHz range. Tweeter drops off naturally. Vertical off-axis, we start seeing a pretty good little dip right at the crossover point of the tweeter, but not bad. The impedance curve, it's pretty smooth, dips to 4 ohms right there in the mid-range, and it's exactly the same way Stereophile measured theirs. Spectral decay looks pretty clean as well. Didn't see any issues there. These polycone drivers behave themselves pretty well, and there's not a lot of ringing or breakup, so I don't see a lot of issues when we look at the spectral decay. So overall, it's a pretty nice speaker that just needs some help. I mean, the crossovers are, average parts that you would see from back in the 90s. So is there room for improvement? Absolutely. So I did a little work on these things, and I wired the lower woofers in parallel to try to get that level to come up. And Doing that brought the level up across the board, because once the woofer level comes up, I could go ahead and let the mid-range levels come on up and balance to the tweeter levels. So sensitivity of this thing came up to 94 dB. It was on average about 90. So the thing has a lot more output now, a lot better dynamics. Let's look at an overlay of the two measurements of the stock measurements versus the measurements of it once I was done with it. You can see now quite a bit of difference there in output. That's going to make it a lot more fun to listen to. You're going to have a lot more output capability and a little better bass response. The thing's more balanced all the way across. Just looking at the on-axis frequency response now, it looks fantastic. It's really smooth top to bottom. Horizontal off-axis looks pretty good. There's a little bit of a peaked area at 2K. Not too bad though. Vertical off-axis looks a lot better, not as big of a dip. The impedance response also is more balanced all the way across. It dips to 4 ohms at the lower frequency and the mid-range areas now, so pretty balanced load. Spectral decay still looks pretty clean, so all that balanced out really well. Something else to consider that they did really well on this thing, whenever you start doing three-way speakers, and you know, it never fails, the phone rings. 1 second. Okay, one of the reasons I don't film out in the shop anymore, because we can't find a moment of silence. It's early in the morning, it's before business hours, so I thought I could sneak in a video. Okay, like I was saying, when you get into a big three-way speaker like this, the woofers start getting bigger and broader, and the baffle starts getting wider. So what they did was, knowing that there's surface reflection issues, they've added this layer of felt all around the mid-range and the tweeter, and it's a little asymmetric, and that was really smart. It's a wise move to try and do something with that. Now, don't think that just because you have a wide speaker, you can go in there and just start putting felt around it and you're going to get good results. You may get some better results. It may become more transparent in the way it sounds, but it may also adversely affect the response of your speaker. Sometimes those surface reflections are have been taken into account, and they need that reinforcement and that to balance out the response as per the crossover that they've designed for it. And when you add a layer of felt and you take that away, there may be some holes in the response because a lot of that forward reflection went away. So typically when we add stuff like this, or when someone adds this, we really would need to go in and design the crossover to work with this felt area, so that we are working exactly with the frequency response that the drivers create in this baffle with this felt. So it can have some adverse effects. How about that? And so I don't recommend just thinking it's going to be better because you can add a bunch of felt to your baffle. However, it might, and you might experiment with little pieces on one side of the tweeter or the other and things like that, and you may find some advantages there. So that was pretty cool. I like seeing that, and that was even done back in the 90s. So a cool speaker that has now become probably a really fun speaker, and the parts quality is going to shoot way up. We're going to provide the customer with some tube connectors and some no-res to kill the cabinet resonances of this big box. Even John Atkinson noticed some cabinet wall resonances with his accelerometer that he placed on it. So a lot of that's going to be improved quite a bit, and the parts quality is going to go up a lot. Like I said, clarity, detail levels are going to be improved tremendously. I didn't put this one together as a kit to throw it out there on the website. I don't throw everything on the website, just ones that I know, or speakers that I think there may be a bunch of others out there that a lot more people can benefit from. This one is fairly old. It's a vintage. We call it vintage. It's from the early 90s. And I don't know that there's that many of these out there, but if you do own one of these Snell CV model, type CV model, then I do have something for you. But again, I'm not going to throw it up there on the website and create a page and stuff for something that we may not sell any more of these. And I kind of treat a lot of the vintage speakers that way, as if it's more of a one-off. It's a custom rebuild or a custom design. I don't see us moving a bunch of these, but if you do have them and you are interested, we can fix you up. That's it for this episode. Thanks again to Ted for the great shirt. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't, and we'll see you guys in the next video.